Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Tell Not Show. As always, we are your hosts. We have the fabulous Kirsha Fox. She is the author of Son of Deception and The White Leaf Child. She's a homeschooling mom of four, avid reader, and gamer.
And my co-host is Julia J.K. Allen, editor, author, and author coach. She's a fantasy and horror author who loves to put magic in everything. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We have an exciting guest, Don Sawyer. An educator and writer, Don grew up in Michigan and came to Canada in the 1960s. Working with youth globally, he has authored over 12 books, including 2 Canadian bestsellers.
Welcome to the show. Very nice to have you. Tell us a little bit about your writing journey. What does it look like? Like, how did it get started, and what does it look like so far for you?
Well, probably should just start with my first book on. And I thought Kirsha was really on the ball there. She held it up there, and that was great. So, like, this was the first book I wrote, and this, believe it or not, was based on our first teaching. That's my wife and I. Our first teaching experiences in rural Newfoundland, and as probably many of your listeners know, Newfoundland is the easternmost province of Canada. It's also the last to join Canada, joined in 1949, and the little community that we were teaching in had only had roads for 9 years. So it was this fascinating fishing community that was still very much rooted in a 200-year past, but also having to deal with modernity that was kind of crashing in on all sides. And so as a teacher, without any education background, by the way, I mean, other than we mentioned I'd gone to University of British Columbia to do a PhD in modern Chinese history, but the Chinese language and I just didn't get along. So I ended up looking for some place to teach, and I worked my way east and found this lovely spot. I mean, but it was pretty adventurous at the time, and it was a community that taught us so much, both in terms of what community is, but the kids in the high school where I taught were so wonderfully patient with me, and together I kind of figured out how to teach and what worked and didn't work, how to use local resources, how to make education relevant and enjoyable and affirming, and those are always kind of the 3 principles that I brought away from that. But the story itself was so intense that I used to write letters to friends of mine and about what was going on, of course. And so, of course, those were real letters that she wrote on paper. And when we went back to the university after 2 years, a friend of mine who was a well-established poet insisted that I write a book. He said, "Man, you got to write a book about this." I said, "No, Tom, I can't write a book. I don't know how to write a book." He said, "No, you got to." Anyway, I did, and then it was accepted to my surprise, and then it became a Canadian bestseller to my surprise, and then it got adopted for use in teacher training programs across Canada, which was really surprising. So it was also very gratifying, that universities felt that the experiences that we had undertaken, that we'd gone through there in this little community, were worthy of using it in a classroom where you were training teachers. In fact, we were even brought out to a university to speak to the student teachers. So it was a great start to a writing career. And I've always thought of myself as an educator who writes, and I've been very fortunate in that regard. The same friend of mine says that he wants on his what he wants written on his tombstone is, well, at least he got a book out of it. And I think there's some truth to that for me, because the books that I've written have all had kind of, well, I guess that's true for most people, but they've sort of sprung from my direct experience. And there's stories I wanted to tell, like, for example, oh, look, I just happen to have it here. This book, which is this was the young adult book that I wrote. And this was based on our experiences working in a Native Indian community in the Fraser Canyon of British Columbia. And I worked there, and I could see, what was going on in the school, and the mismatch between the culture of the Native community and the culture of the school. And I could feel the frustration as an educator. I was fortunate to work with some very creative people, and we did some neat things in the school. But after we were done, I said, I got to tell this story. I got to tell what it feels like as best I can from the point of view of a student trapped in this, and it has become hopeless as a result. And so it was a really gratifying story. And what was best was that it was picked up and used in Native schools right across the country, high schools. And so again, it was really affirming that particularly whenever you're working from another cultural perspective, you have to be very respectful and very careful. But at the same time, to have Native students write me a lot of in high school and adults. One woman wrote me and said, "This is the first book I've ever started and actually finished." And I said, "Wow, you can't get much higher praise than that."
No, you can't.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, and then sort of things, one thing after another. I did another young adult novel. I did a series of novels for adults because I was teaching adult education. And then my two daughters, I used to tell them bedtime stories about this horrible teacher I had named Miss Flint, and what a nasty. And so they finally at Christmas they gave me a book and said, "Okay, Dad, you got to write down all the Miss Flint stories," and I did, and then those were published too as the meanest teacher in the world, so just kind of fun. It was like, and thank God I didn't have to depend on my writing income.
Yeah,
we would have all died of starvation. But and I really enjoyed writing. I've been honored to be asked to write, for example, for the Shuswapnik Cultural Education Society to write a book. I guess the other thing I wanted to say too is that writing, isn't always fiction. And I've written an awful lot of curriculum for classrooms and teaching. And when I was in West Africa, which we might want to get into later, where we were training community development workers, obviously with African colleagues, some of the best writing I've ever done, which was creative and innovative, and it was another kind of writing for sure, another genre, sure, but still exciting, because for people out there who say, "Well, I don't think I can make it as a novelist," well, you probably can't, but writing is such a transferable skill. When you get good at it, you can certainly use it in a lot of very productive ways.
Absolutely.
That's a long answer to a quick question.
No, we love it.
We love it. We love long answers for sure.
Yes.
Yes. No, I wanted to say kudos and congratulations, not only on who I say that to anyone who's finished a book, but you have finished 12 books and 2 of them are Canadian bestsellers. So especially congratulations to you for that. And it sounds like you've had many wonderful life experiences connected to writing that have inspired you to write your books as well.
That's exactly right. And, I feel really, really fortunate for the opportunities I've had, like to work in Africa I worked there almost 10 years. I was off and on, which again, I want to thank my wife. Not only was she the only person who could read my writing and typed out my first manuscript, but she stuck with me. She would I would go out to Africa for 4 and 5 weeks, and she would be there with the kids and doing. But anyway, she, her support has been so important. But it allowed me to do things, like work in Africa, and again working with colleagues. We weren't passing through. We were, and to have that opportunity to work so closely with people from a totally different background, different culture, is amazing. And it really, for me, over time, it really made me understand better what it means to be a citizen of the world. And in this latest book, in fact, the Burning Gem here, there it is.
That's nice cover.
Which we can talk more about later. Part of what this is about is this. It turns out that there's this evil cabal that's using these gems, which are created from people's souls, as well as a whole bunch of other means to sort of keep people divided and feeling powerless, so this elite can rule, right? Can govern this evil sort of elite. So I'm sort of suggesting too that maybe it's time to get over some of our leftover evolutionary distrust of the other and find more what we have in common than what we have that keeps us apart. So that's kind of my little lecture for the day.
Yeah. It sounds like you write in many different genres. You write curriculum, you write biographical, you write novels, historical fiction.
Adult,
Was that last one dystopian?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
It's urban fiction in the sense that it's I had so much fun writing it because you're talking about it's not really dystopia. Well, yeah. I mean it's sort of in there somewhere, but these guys fight back, and so far they're holding their own against the dystopians. Yeah, right, exactly. And in fact the book, there's a sequel to this which will be coming out next May. And that will complete the arc, the story arc. But as sort of the plot thickens, they realize the extent of this evil cabal that they're up against. The stakes get higher and higher, and so there again, like it starts off. It starts off again drawing on my knowledge of what sort of sterile suburbs can look like and feel like. And one of the main characters, Barbara, is sort of caught in this loveless marriage and desperately wants to get out but doesn't know how. And this gym maker shows up, and so he says, I can make a gym for you that encapsulates your soul, or at least a part of it. Well, anyway, and like, long story short, he does, and then he leaves, and she said, man, I really feel empowered. I got to find this guy because this is my way out. And so she goes through the New York subway and finds this abandoned subway station under the New York subway, and finally reconnects with him. And it turns out that he has to cite a contract that he could never touch another person. He could never reveal his true name or ever have a relationship. So he was frozen emotionally and physically. She bursts into his life, and suddenly he starts to see hope and love again. And so the two of them, take on this evil force that he's only sort of been vaguely aware of. And that takes him to places like Budapest in Hungary, where they track this guy down. And so it's fun to travel, not just in a fantasy realm, but in a real realm too, but maybe look at it from another perspective.
Right.
Absolutely. I love that. I love it when books take me to new places around the world, and you've never been there, but you know a lot of its history now, and you feel
glimpses
there. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think to me, like at Budapest, have either of you been to Budapest?
Unfortunately, no.
Incredible city, and Hungary has this very tragic history of being overrun by every horde, since Genghis Khan. And you literally, and you feel it, you feel it, that there's a sadness, sort of a darkness about it in many ways. And then during World War II, it was occupied by the Nazis for 5 years. And of course, there was an anti Jewish pogrom. And so many of the Jewish population fled, leaving these homes behind. And when we were there, some young people had taken these old mansions that had sort of started to crumble during the communist era and had never been rebuilt, and turned them into what they call ruin bars. And so these are these old homes with plaster falling off, but they put posters on the walls, and they've got a little bar with beer, and people are cooking food, and it's just wild. And every little room I have one table and an old sofa, and so it's like this maze, and there's a band playing somewhere, and it just really it's I gotta build this into a book. And so it plays a role in the Burning Gem, because it's so eerie in some ways in itself.
Right.
it kind
It's like that living history aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're living with the ghosts of the family that lived here, but you're
All of that.
just enjoying your Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a testament to like human endurance, like right.
And that story of Hungary, and again, I really enjoyed doing the research. I did a lot of research on Hungarian history. I did a lot of research on New York subways, which turned out to be really fascinating.
Right.
I found out that there was a first subway system, the New York subway system opened in 1903, but there was a guy who had tried to build one back in the 1860s and 70s and failed. But what he had left behind was this massive underground station that was just unfinished and abandoned. And so in my book, there's a group of colonists who find this, and they're kind of magicians, they're shapeshifters, they're kind of outcasts. They're people with sort of special knowledge and special skills, and they never fit, right? They're misfit. They don't really fit into the regular society. So they find their way to this abandoned terminal and transform it into this magnificent, really utopian community where there's people from all different countries and cultures and backgrounds, and it's run as a syndicate. And so there's a magical feel to that as well. And so I wanted to, because again, that's the kind of a model of how we can also work together. And so it was fun to do that, to create worlds.
Not only that, but like you kind of show what could be,
absolutely. And I think, for me, that's what I like about urban fantasy, that it's kind of like a mirror image. You kind of flip, and it's literally under your feet. I mean, it's not like, excuse me. It's not like high fantasy that takes you somewhere. This is, literally. And I must say, some of the urban fantasy I don't care for because, it's just more dragons and werewolves and what have you. But I remember one guy asked me, he said, do you have any werewolves in there? And I said, no. I said, but you know what? I've always noticed that the biggest monsters I've ever met have always been human. And
that's my favorite monster to write about is humans as a monster. Yes.
So so we're dealing with some really nasty people. And they're pretty monstrous. In fact, the Mester, that's how they find out is that he's just such a horrible, and they call him the hideous monster in Hungarian. But not that his appearance makes him hideous, but we don't even know if he's human for sure. We never completely determine it. But anyway, it was a lot of fun to write. And I think what I tried to do, too, was to keep a pace. I didn't want it to get, And so Barbara, has to confront her uncertainties and insecurities. Like the gym maker himself, he knows that as soon as he lets her in the door, he's violated all the principles of his contract. And the Messer is going to be on him. And of course he is, and because he can sense that he's and so he sends a thug over to the market to find out what's going on, and so that kind of evolves in a separate storyline of its own. So
anyway, you sound very enthusiastic about this book. You can always tell when an author is just like so happy to write this story. Like it sounds really interesting. You have a little bit of everything in there. You've got your romance and the dystopian and the magic and the history and the setting. That's
I thank you for saying that. That was kind of and now the romance is a little odd because it turns out that the gym maker is 110 years old. But as he says, when he tells Barbara that, he says, I look pretty good for my age, don't you think?
Yeah.
He's been kind of frozen by this contract, emotionally. Anyway,
I really like that you can put real world issues into your books and whatnot. I like doing that with my own books. I also write fantasy.
Yeah.
So, it's there's a part where this boy who's a half demon and he hides it with hats and whatnot,
Sure.
but he reflects on how the humans are always touted as being good, the best.
Mm-hmm.
But where is there a goodness when it comes to people who are different than them, who have done nothing wrong, And
Just different.
I really love using fantasy to sort of hold up a mirror.
Yeah.
I use that.
So we're not talking about different races of humans now. We're talking about, the weirder races, the half.
But it allows us to have
dragon,
that
the fae versus the elves versus the dwarves.
Yeah, I've used that image, that I think that a mirror, it holds up a mirror that we can look at ourselves.
Yes.
You think of someone like Ursula Le Guin. Do you both know her?
Oh, yes.
The novelist, the science fiction, wonderful, one of my very favorite writers. And she created worlds where she played out earthly issues. And the one probably best known for is The Left Hand of Darkness. And in this world, all the beings there can be both male and female. They can both be fathers and mothers of children. And so when you're reading this book, I mean, you're any concept of gender, identification just kind of evaporates because it's constantly challenging to rethink. And in another one called The Word for World is Forest. This is this massive forest where this peaceful people have been all their lives. But then of course the earthlings come in because to take all the trees.
Right.
But over time, these people have developed an inability to be violent. They can't. They're physically unable to be violent until one of them is beaten almost to death by an earthling, and then he develops anger and hatred, and he teaches that to the rest, and then of course they attack. And but now what? Now what happens to this?
What are they saving anymore if they're no longer? Yeah.
So, like you say, it just holds up. Then, in this one, I'm really interested in this issue of tribalism, and I think it was really brought home to me when I worked in Africa and also worked with Native Indian people. This distrust of the other, it seems to me, is at the root of so many issues that are challenging us. Here we are faced with existential challenges, and instead of finding ways to work together to solve them, we seem to be intent on sort of, fear of the other, which is pretty basic. Time to get over it. That's my.
Yes.
I would agree. I would definitely agree. I think that it's good to find the common, like tribalism is not, I think that finding your tribe is great because you find the people that you can connect to and relate to and everything like that. But we should find our tribe in every tribe. It's kind of, how I'm looking at it.
Well, we're up against some evolutionary issues. I mean, we apparently, I mean, there was in fact, I'm reading a really interesting book by an evolutionary biologist at the University of Toronto, and it's about how we've got to get beyond this tribal division. But he talks about about how it might have served some purpose, a million years ago. And I remember an anthropologist say, well, those tribes who saw strangers and said, look, new friends, let's have them over to dinner, well, they're probably no longer in the gene pool. And I'm afraid there's some truth to that, that it served a certain, evolutionary purpose. We also know that, but then you went from small bands to larger groups. And we know that we're only evolutionarily prepared to recognize groups of about 150. Once you get beyond that, you lump them all together. You can know 150 people kind of as a personality and that kind of thing. But after that, those redheads are like that, or those guys that wear feathers.
That's when you start getting more stereotypes. Yes.
And so there's that. So to me, it's like, well, let's think about that. Let's not just accept that as that's. I mean, I think little kids, are born selfish, right? And their whole initial existence is to survive, me.
Mhm.
But as they get older, we help them understand that they are part of a larger community and they have to share and get over things. And I don't think we do the same at a kind of tribal, if you will, level. I don't think we have the same ability to talk about it or discuss it in schools and in our homes and find ways to get beyond it. But my book's going to do that, by golly.
Yes, we love that. No, that's great.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about your writing process. What does it look like going from idea to then finished manuscript?
I had such an erratic writing career. I mean, when my kids were young, I was, for example, Where the Rivers Meet. I would, tell them a bedtime story, and I'd put them to bed. And by the time I got up to my desk, it was 10 o'clock, and so I'd work from 10 to 1, and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. The first book I wrote. Tomorrow is School. My father was dying of cancer, in fact, in Michigan, and I went back to be close to him. So I had time, and that gave me the time to write that. And thanks, Dad, for giving me that opportunity, because it
Mhm.
started me off on a. So I don't know that I have a routine. It really depends on the book and the time. This last book actually took me 8 years to write. I mean, I wasn't writing 24/7, but I was actually living in Fairhope, Alabama, which is sort of an interesting community with a lot of writers and artists. And I was in a writing group there, which I recommend. And these were great writers, and I had to come up with something, and so I started this story. And it stems actually, it's called the Soul Catcher series. And it's based on,
Okay.
probably you've heard stories about Aboriginal people being reluctant to have their pictures taken because they felt that it took some of their soul and maybe captured them. And when you think about it, it makes sense, because those pictures freeze you. You look at a picture that was taken 7 or 8 years ago, you say, "Oh my God, that's not me." Well, and because you move on, but the picture doesn't. So anyway, I thought, well, gee, what if there was a machine that actually did take a part of the soul and crystallize it, and that's sort of the genesis of that. But working with this group of writers, I was able to not only write, but write well. But they were giving me a lot of feedback, and so I was able to lay the foundation. And I wrote fairly regularly for a while. But as I say, to be honest with you, this thing ended up with 190,000 words after. And as you know, nobody wants to touch a 190,000 word book. So I ended up working with an editor and turning it into 2 books, which is what I should have done in the first place.
Mhm.
And so it's been a really interesting process. Sometimes I get into I tend to kind of write in spurts. I heard a guy that he called it manic depressive writing. I'm not sure not much like that term, but the idea that you're all in, or you're like, oh man, I don't want to write today. And I got a friend who's he's a professional writer. He gets up in the morning at 8 o'clock, and he eats breakfast from 8 to 9. He writes from 9 to 12. From 12 to 1, he goes out and works in the garden, and then from 2 to 5, he writes. I'm not like that. I don't have that kind of discipline. But it's my creative outlet. Other people do other things, and I can't do that. I can't knit. I can't build furniture, but I can write pretty well.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, that's a
Yes.
wonderful gift to have. Is
Yeah,
the
yeah,
gift of
Mhm.
communication and language and writing. Yeah,
yeah. And
very
like I said, once you get that, I mean, and I don't know exactly how I developed that. I don't understand that,
valuable.
and I don't understand why are people musicians? My God, I can't even play a harmonica.
Right.
I don't understand all that, but once you get those writing skills nailed down, and you can learn a lot for
Mhm.
sure, you can transfer into anything. I mean, I'm a good curriculum writer. I'm a good business writer.
Mhm.
And so you can apply those skills to a lot of different situations, and not just creative writing.
Absolutely. I think that everyone has different aptitudes, right? Like the music or the writing or the math or different things that we all kind of naturally understand. We can also develop a lot of skills with
Absolutely.
practice and all of that. But I know for myself, I've always been grateful that languages and words have been kind of where I get to be a nerd and have that aptitude naturally because like I said, it helps in so many different ways. Just communicating, period. Like it's such a great outlet to have.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Are either of you good at foreign languages?
I think I have an easier time. Like when people say like, oh, that's like Greek to me or that's like a foreign language to me. That's more like when I think of math or budgeting. That's what that feels like to me. It feels like a foreign language that is just indecipherable, can't understand very well. Whereas like I can look at a word and say like, oh, that's probably German or French or I might not know what the word means, but I can at least kind of figure out like what family of language it comes from or make
I
guesses.
was asking because you're talking about having a proficiency in language, and I do pretty well in English, but man, I've been working on
Yeah.
Spanish for like it's talking about a lesson in humility.
Yeah, and that's I think that I do pick up on languages a little easier than other people, but it's the same way that somebody can like listen to a song and play the piano and just like know the notes from
I
listening.
know.
It's just like they've got that aptitude, and so it's I really geek out about languages.
I am not good at foreign languages, which is really sad because I love them. I love them so much. I love to study them. I love to like hear it, the way it sounds, the way that the way they put together their phrases. The idioms are like so much fun to play with.
Right.
But darn if I don't have the memory of a goldfish sometimes,
I know.
It makes it a lot harder.
Getting older, but I never was very good, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But what you're saying too, it's like language is so reflective of culture and cultural values. And I think I mentioned I worked for the Shwetnik, which is a native tribe in the interior British Columbia.
Yeah.
And they asked me to write a book that paralleled the provincial curriculum. And in grade 2, it was family. So, like the regular curriculum, I think it was the first one was you, the second one was your family, the third one was your community. I think that's the way it went. So when I was working with a group of elders, I said, well, let's start off by coming up with the Shuswap word is for family. And that seems like a reasonable place to start. They kind of looked at each other and they talked a little bit and they said, well, we don't really have a word for family. I said, what?
Right.
But what they could come up with was a word that meant something like all my relations. So family, and in fact, it did extend it to about 100, a little over 100 people. I was like, kind of ended up figuring.
Right, their community is their whole community is their family.
And so it's like a whole different way of being in the world, and your language reflects it. So I've always been fascinated by that.
Well, that's kind of what they play with in 1984 with the double speak and revising the language over and over again. That if you take out the word, people won't be able to have the treacherous thoughts, right, that come, or the traitorous thoughts that come with it. By removing it from the language, then they no longer have access to the concept of these things. And
don't have the words, you often don't have the concepts.
Yeah. I think that's so. I think language is fascinating for many reasons. One of them is because it's so intrinsically tied to culture and the way you perceive the world, right?
Exactly. And again, I learned that in Africa. I mean, I would be working with facilitators over there, and one time we did a lineup of how many languages people knew. It's called a social kind of thing. Where all right, everybody, if you so you talk to people and sort out how many languages you know. And so I said, how many you know? Three? Okay, and then four.
Wow, yeah.
Well, guess who was at the end of the line? I was. I was the instructor.
With your one language.
And I said, well, I speak a little French. And that doesn't count. But like the guy next to me spoke 3 languages, then 5, 6, 7. Now, a lot of those were local tribal languages, but they had no relation to each other. Right. As well as English, of course, and the national language. Often they spoke French. And just, I think part of it's growing up in an enriched, linguistic environment. But I mean, it is humbling. You say, oh man.
Oh, it is. I traveled in Europe for a while, and the high schoolers there at the time, I mean, one of them, she was studying 3 languages at a time, just in high school. Her native language,
Right.
she was fluent in English, she was learning like Spanish and French, and I was just like, looking at her like, how are you doing this? And she was like what? Like it's hard?
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
I think that we've lost so much in the United States in particular. I think that the past generations were so intent on creating this identity of we're Americans and we speak English and nothing else. It was such an erasure of the previous identities of everyone else, and this push to make them, American.
Americans.
Well, even in my own,
Now we're kind of, I think we're for it.
yeah, no, even in my family, there's like, my
Julia lived
sister
this
was,
firsthand.
yeah, my sister was a honeymoon baby, and so she was learning English as a child, as an infant, when my mom was still mastering English herself, and so she had to take speech classes, and it was the 80s, and so the teacher told her, like, don't ever teach her Korean or her English will never be good enough.
That was her first
language. So my mom was terrified of teaching us Korean growing up. I had to learn in college, and it was much, much more of a struggle, obviously, than it is.
But did you manage? Good for you, because
I'm high intermediate kind of level of Korean now, but there's definitely going to class in college and learning it from scratch was a lot different because a lot of the kids in my class had at least spoke it growing up, right? And so they understood a lot more than I did going into the class, and so that was a really big struggle. But I think that is so the epitome of the U.S. is that the speech teacher was telling my mom, like, don't ever teach her Korean or else she'll never be good at English, and that's like the effects that has on.
And of course, the irony is now that we know that kids are exposed to multiple languages, actually their brains develop differently.
Yes,
so they have,
very beneficial.
They have neurons that mine don't work.
Right, and that's the thing is I think that before it was studied much, if you are learning more than one language, you kind of speak a little bit later. Because you're parsing through 2 different languages, and so you seem developmentally delayed at first, and then you kind of jump ahead and just kind of exponentially get a lot better at it. So it's like the more people were learning about bilingualism, the more they were seeing the benefits of it. But like I said, just being a child of the 80s, my sister was unfortunately they steered my mom in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Well, like you were talking about, Kirsha, like being in Europe. I mean, if I mean, anybody, like if you're in Sweden or if you're in France, I mean, people come up to you, say, killer teal, and you can say, I'm sorry. Oh, Christ. You don't, you're English. You must be American. I mean, yeah, I'm afraid so. I mean, and people, like in Netherlands, they speak better English than I do. I mean, it's incredible.
Right.
And so they haven't been harmed by learning multiple languages as they grew up. And I think they've been exposed to enrichment, not just cognitively, but also culturally as a result of it too. And I must say, in Canada, we do have 2 official languages here, French and English. And so we do get to read French on the back of our Cheerios boxes, which kind of keeps us a little abreast. We travel to Quebec, and it really is like going to another country. And so there's a good, and as you probably know, Canada followed a somewhat different immigration pattern called the mosaic instead of the melting pot, where cultures were allowed to, in fact, many German language schools persisted up into the 1900s, where languages were valued, culture was, celebrated, and that kind of thing. And I think it's benefited us. I think we have more tolerance for different cultures and different ways of being in the world, because we kind of grew up a little bit with a different attitude.
That assimilation has been very harmful in America, I think, especially.
It's been difficult for a lot of people, and my daughter works with inner city youth in New Orleans, and she's been very, very successful. And she said, Dad, one of the reasons I'm successful is because I grew up in Canada. I just didn't bring the same kinds of prejudices. And I mean, and let's face it, it's those come for the most part, they're not written out for us. I mean, they're just kind of absorbed. It's not like people I don't think, want to be. It's just you grow up with it. Or, like, I can remember my kids, Fatu Faye, who was a woman from Gambia, and she taught, both my daughters were there, and she was making peanut stew, and they were all talking. And, it's a different kind of way of being. And so you just grow up with a different attitude. Yeah, anyway. That's interesting. I wanted to see if I can just find this real quickly, because we were talking about different kinds of books. Well, one of the things I'm really quite proud of is when my kids were little, I would do a lunch bag every morning, and maybe you guys have done this too. So, like, for example, you would all right, here's one. Maybe not the best one, but like, what do you get?
Oh, yeah.
Cross a chili pepper with a shovel and a dachshund. So then, on the other side of the bag, you'd have a hot diggity dog. So anyway, so I had like 1,000 of these because the kids would.
Yeah.
And so a publisher said, "Oh, we gotta put those into a book." So that's kind of another genre entirely. But again, growing out of the experiences of being in a family.
Yeah. No, I love that you've let yourself explore so many different genres by being inspired in so many different ways by different events in life. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite author?
Well, I mentioned Ursula Le Guin. I think that she is one of the most challenging authors that we can read. But I think for a contemporary, Barbara Kingsolver is brilliant. And the Poisonwood Bible, I think, is one of the best books written in America in a long time.
I've read that one. I quite enjoyed it.
It's great. And now she's got a new one out, which I'm called Demon Copperhead, which is based on the David Copperfield Dickens story, which is supposed to be absolutely riveting. So because she's also a writer that writes with a conscience, and so her writing isn't just diverting; it also is challenging, and it causes us to think about who we are, how we relate to other people, how we relate to the natural environment. She lives on a farm in Appalachia, and she wrote a book about the monarch butterfly. She's very and so I think she's an outstanding author. Really do. One of my favorite authors was Ken Kesey, who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
That's a good book. Yeah.
Oh, what a powerful book, and it still affects me to this day. And I like Neil Gaiman, his stuff, and King and all that stuff. I'm trying to think of anybody very profound, but I just, geez, what's the guy's name? I can't think.
They don't have to be the best; they have to be your favorite. Sometimes you just enjoy a book because you enjoyed it.
Absolutely, but I must say, for the most part, not always, but for the most part, I do like books that just sort of shake you up a little bit. I don't know how to read anything, I don't mean drudgery or anything like that, but just something that makes you like, just somebody who can write really well, but no, I'm not gonna find it.
I like books that expand your world.
Exactly, that's what I'm trying to say. Nick Hornby is what I'm trying to think of. About a Boy, he wrote, and anyway, he wrote one called A Long Way Down, where these four guys on New Year's Eve, they're all on top of this building in London to jump. They're already ready to commit suicide, but when they get there, they start talking to each other, and they each decide no, they're going to give it another year, and he follows their stories. So that kind of thing, it's like just
awesome,
incredible. He said wonderful,
so intriguing,
So but yeah, I mean, and I'm reading some just historical novels now that are fun to read.
I am curious about this next question. So you're an educator, so I'm really curious to hear if you could tell a new author one thing, what advice would you give them?
A new author. Okay. I guess as an author now, you're talking about somebody who hasn't been published.
Yes.
Yeah,
Or like
yeah.
they're
Someone newer to writing. Yeah.
And what I guess the first thing I'd say, why are you writing? And I don't mean that and not rhetorically, but what are your aspirations? What is it that you hope to achieve? If and I think sometimes, are you writing for yourself? Are you writing for your family? Are you writing to become a best-selling author? Because that's going to, a lot is going to depend on what you're looking for. Because if you really are serious about going the novel route and try to be a professional writer, then you need to take some classes. You need to one way or another get some background on how to write at that level. I guess I would also say, I hope you're reading a lot, because that's how you're going to understand what good writing looks and feels like. And if you're not reading a lot, then I think you don't have a bar to compare yourself to. Not that you're going to be as good, but at least you know what it feels like and looks like and how it affects you and how it moves you. I guess the other thing I'd say to a new writer is think about the various genres that are available to you. If you have skills as a writer, think about how else you might apply those. Maybe as a journalist, as a writing op-eds. There's lots of different ways of being a writer, and being a best-selling author is only one of them. So why are you writing?
Yeah, that's a good. It's always good to know your purpose when it comes to writing in general. We had an acronym. I worked at the Writing Center at my university, and we had an acronym that was MAP. This is for mode, like medium. What type of writing is it? A poem, story, whatever. Audience, purpose, and then structure. Right. So knowing those things before you start writing is always really helpful.
Why are you writing at all? I mean, it's like in that case, you're writing it. You're writing because, in this case, it's for an assignment or something. But what motivates you to write? What?
Right.
Why do I write? I mean, for me, virtually everything I've read, I've been passionate about. It's something I want to write. And so by getting it out, like getting this book out meant a lot to me. If it sells well, that's great. If it doesn't, that's okay too. But I wanted to get it out. And so that was my objective. So, I mean, realistically, what do you want? And then once you know why you're writing, then you can sort of better figure out what you need to do to get there. But you guys know better than most what a difficult field it is right now to market books. We had 4 million books published last year, 4 million books. And almost 2/3 of those were self-published. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with it. But you just have a whole lot of people with a whole lot of books.
A lot of competition.
So again, I mean, if you're writing for your own enjoyment, own pleasure, super. I have a friend who writes great children's stories. She binds them together and she sends them out to her family and friends. That's great. She loves them, the books, and everybody loves them. She doesn't even try to get them, sold and published. She just enjoys doing them. So why are you writing?
That is good advice.
Yeah.
All right. What is your favorite part of writing and your least favorite part of writing?
The favorite part for me is when when your muse is sitting on your shoulder.
Oh, that's a good time. Yes.
Right.
When it flows, and I think, again, we talk about what to do, to say to a writer. And when that happens, if you can't think of a word, skip it. Just keep writing and let her rip, and come back and fill in the blanks later. But when, it's such an interesting vocation, isn't it? You're trying to get from point A to point B, and all you got to use is words. And so, what words do I use? How do I put them together? And so it's an incredibly creative process, and you have to be pretty adept at knowing how to string those things together so other people can see what you're seeing and feel what you're feeling and identify with the character that you've created. So boy, once you get going and you've got something rolling, oh, gosh, it feels good, and it may not last all that long, but a lot of times I'll get to maybe after 2 or 3 pages and then I go back and it's not as good as I thought it was, but it's still, I got something to work with,
Mhm.
and so it's I really do like that part. And sometimes I'll write late at night, 1, 2, 3 in the morning, and instead of being exhausted, I'm exhilarated, if it's been going well.
I know that feeling.
If it hasn't been going well, I just want to jump off a bridge.
Oh yeah, sometimes you're trying so hard to just get some words out and they're not coming, and you just want to chuck your computer in the bin and keep going. Never do it again.
Just crawl under your covers.
A friend of mine was saying that writing is sort of like trying to fix a watch with heavy gloves on. I mean,
all those little tiny screws, and you've got
Yeah.
gloves
words,
like that.
just to fit together like little pieces, but instead they're like,
Oh yes. There's
And
so
it
many
is.
little
It's
strings
so
to keep
wonderful when
track of.
they're- I'm sorry, Christian.
Oh, there's so many moving parts. There's so many characters to track, their motivations, the little strings, what's happening behind the scenes, what influences from the world do you get? Like there's so many elements that go into creating a believable setting with believable characters with an interesting story. Yeah.
It's something, isn't it? Yeah, and to be able to do it, it's you have a sense of achievement, accomplishment. I was saying, lots of people have really good ideas, and let's face it, all creations start with ideas. But if you don't apply them, you haven't created anything. And so having those wonderful ideas is great, but now you've actually got to move to and that's where it gets a little dicey. But it's also where it gets satisfying because you're literally creating something that wasn't there before. And you get this blank. We used to talk about blank sheet of paper, but now we just talk about a blank screen. And you got
the little cursor flashing can cause an existential crisis in itself.
No, it can be quite intimidating sometimes. On the other hand, there are days when I got up in the morning and geez, I can't wait to get at it. And the editing can be really tough. I don't know about you, but when I worked on this last book, because it was 190,000 words, and really nobody was interested in anything over 95,000. And I was thinking, oh my God, how am I going to trim this in two? And as I say, I think I hired an editor to work with me. She was great. And I think not enough people do that. I've had assigned editors from publishers in the past. And some have been good, some haven't. But in this case, it was a real collaborative relationship. And she was really good at helping me, deepen the point of view. But I worked with her and I said, look, there's no way I'm getting this book down to 120,000. I can't cut 70,000 words out of it. And so that's when, I started thinking about cutting it into two, and it worked beautifully. And she helped me. So both books really are freestanding. You can read them individually, but they also are, integrally connected.
I'm like laughing over here because the same thing happened with me. I only set out to write the one book, but it got too thick, so I split it. And then I'm like, okay, time to write the second book. And it got too big, so I split it. And now I'm trying to finish this third book, and I've reached 180,000 words.
No.
Oh dear, this was supposed to be a trilogy. But the characters just keep finding more to do, and the bad guy is really diabolical, and most of my readers are like, yeah, keep writing books, keep giving us more. They don't cut it down, keep giving us more. So I'm just laughing to myself of this series that doesn't want to end.
It's become unwieldy. It does not want to end.
Your books is coming out at about 180,000 words.
It is the third book in the trilogy. If I hit 200,000, I'm gonna split it.
Oh my gosh, that's really. I mean, if you have a readership, I mean, it's not like we don't see books that size.
There are books that thick. There are books that thick, but I am one of those indie authors. And the thicker your book is, the more it costs you to print, the more you have to charge for it. And a lot of people are uncomfortable paying $25 for a self-published book. They want something more in the $15 to $20 range, like less if you can swing it. So it's a sacrifice if you want to print a big book before you're a well-known name. Yeah.
That's the key, isn't it? I mean, you know, these guys, I'm just looking at some of the books over here that are 400 and 500. I mean, J.K. Rowling's can print anything she wants.
Yes. Oh, yes.
But
her books got progressively bigger as she became more well-known. It wasn't until the fourth book that she was able to go huge because, like, there was such a following now. Yeah.
I think the very first one was only like, you know, maybe 250.
Yeah, it was not very big.
Very short, the first 2, 3.
Anyway, yeah. So I mean, it's such an interesting industry as well. You know, like how do you get published and how do you promote and that kind of thing. And I must say, I was really glad to. I've never worked. I've always been fortunate enough to have publishers to work with. But things, as I say, things have changed so much. I mean, publishing industry. What do publishers do? I mean, like I said, I don't mean to. I mean, unless you're one of the big five, I mean, they don't have money to spend on promotion. You know, so yeah. And oftentimes they don't provide editorial services.
And there is a big shift, even with the big five, to only pick up authors who have already established themselves.
Exactly. Absolutely.
They're taking fewer and fewer chances on new authors. So
the
whole industry is just really evolving, and we're all sort of on the edge of our seats, wondering like what's
going to happen next.
Yes, what's happening.
And you guys are kind of part of it too, because when my book first came out, I said, well, now how do I get it promoted? I mean, my publisher was doing some things, but you know, and so I went on and said, well, blog sites that will review urban fantasy. I think, and there's like 1,000, you know, of sites, and how do you wade through that? How do you even begin to know? And then, you know, so it's just it's a really interesting time to be a writer. That's for sure. Maybe what you say about what should you say to a person who wants to write? Don't do it.
You're signing up for a lot more than you realize when you begin writing. Everyone always thinks it's just writing with stories, but there's so much involved in the authoring business side of stuff.
It really is.
Yeah.
But if you don't enjoy it, you know, don't.
You have to enjoy it.
You have to enjoy it.
You have to enjoy it.
Enjoy the process.
There has to be a story in you that needs to come out so bad that you're willing to sacrifice to get it out there.
I think, to me, when I said passion, I think that's what I mean. I think that's, to me, the biggest thing. I mean, passion for telling the story and telling it well, but you need to get it out there. And with my first book, Tomorrow is School, you know, that community was so wonderful to us, so generous to us, so kind to us. The students were so amazing. And there were so many wonderful stories. Like, you know, like I said, we didn't have anything to work with. We didn't have a lot of material. So we used the local, I was supposed to be teaching history, but of course these kids had never been out of this little tiny community. So we went to the local, graveyard. Of course, it was segregated by denomination. Tribes persist everywhere, even in death. But if we found a cluster of deaths, someone would go talk to their grandfather and find out what happened. Oh, that was the Lady Janice that went down in this, you know. And so we were recreating a history from the community. And I said, well, what else would you like to know from your community? Well, let's do a questionnaire. And what would you like to know? The community. Well, one of the groups decided they wanted to know if the community felt that sex education should be taught in high school. Now, this was 1971 in a Salvation Army school in a remote, very traditional community. And so the questionnaire is a wonderful idea because you have to come up with the questions that are precise. You know, then you've got to take them out and hand them out to the community members, you know, and then you collect them and you compile them, you make your report. It was a great exercise, but I was petrified. And sure enough, the girl who had sort of initiated this one, different groups were doing different subjects, was the daughter of the Salvation Army captain. And so
Right.
my principal said, Don, I just had a call from the Salvation Army captain. He'd like to meet with you. I said, oh, geez. Oh, great. So, he did. He and his wife, Mrs. Captain, I guess, came in and they were just enraged. They said, why did you assign this to my daughter? I said, I didn't assign it to your daughter. She and her this is what they were interested in. Well, why did you allow them to do it? Well, because I thought it was a legitimate question, and it was a way of getting them to assess community attitudes. Well, they never were placated, but it's like that kind of thing. I wanted to tell that story, right? I wanted to tell that.
What an awkward situation.
Right.
So what are you going to do as a young teacher? Are you going to back down?
Right.
Yeah, it was just things like that I wanted to tell, and it's so cool. And I'm still in contact with a lot of those kids, believe it or not. Most of them are retired now. Can you believe it?
Yes.
Years fly by.
No, Salvation Army has an interesing motto as well. I believe it's blood and fire. Fire, I think.
Blood and fire. Because I thought that when he sat down, I think it was on his hat. And oh, jeez.
Yeah, how intense. Yes, right.
And I don't mean that, Salvation Army do a lot of good things. I'm not, unloading on them. But at the moment, I wasn't so sure about the blood and fire part.
Right. No, I completely understand. We want to give you an opportunity to talk more about, let our audience know where they can find out more about you and your books online. So this is a great time to share your socials and talk about your new book, where we can find your new book.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, if you're interested, I've got a webpage, which is Don Sawyer, just donsawyer.org. And that's got all my books on it, my past books and my current books. And I have a Facebook page, just Don Sawyer Books, that I try to keep up, pretty regularly. And so I'd love to hear from people if they'd like to contact me. And of course, all of these books can be bought on our friends Amazon, which now sells more than 50% of the books in the country. And I just want to thank you very much for having me on. It was really fun.
Oh, yes.
Thank you so much for being a guest tonight. It's been wonderful talking with you.
Oh, I really enjoyed it.
Pleasure to get to know you better. Yeah.
Well, it's just funny. I really enjoyed it. Like we're sitting down over a beer. It's been a really nice chat.
Yes. But thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to everyone who's listening along at home. Remember, there is more than one way up a mountain. And our next episode airs Friday as usual. If you're interested in being a guest on The Tellnut Show, you can find us at The Tellnut Show on social media or email us at thetellnutshow@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach and can be found at hijinksrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to four, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks and see you next time.